Oh, we
Stop
behind
it for a
on,
second.
are we behind on time?
Miss Otis, tell us about Steinbeck, the man that you were literary agent for so many years.
Well, I think what is very hard to tell about is how much fun he was. And, of course, the students and the professors don't know that. And I've been trying to think how some message could be gotten across, and I don't think there's any way. But Ian and I certainly had laughs all the time, didn't we?
I think that's the thing I missed the most, besides the companionship, the fact that he had was a very witty man. Of course, some of his books are quite profound, but in life he was moody, of course, but when he was high, he was absolutely delightful, wasn't he, Elizabeth?
Yes, he certainly was.
Very funny.
I wish he were here right this minute. I think he'd be very entertained to see Elaine and me sitting here being interviewed.
I think he'd be delighted. The Steinbeck collection is housed in the room called the Elizabeth Otis room. I think he'd be especially. He says in a letter that's in my new book of his letters, he says, Elizabeth Otis is the other side of my coin. That's how close they were.
You worked very close for how many years?
Yeah, I just figured it out today, 37.
37, that would make it about 1931?
Yes, 1931.
Mr. Steinbeck, excuse me.
Well, we didn't really work closely. He did the work, after all. But I did read.
I will say that she was the critic he respected most. When something went wrong, I didn't have to say, sometimes a writer can't always tell. I knew that Elizabeth would catch it, and she was the one he listened to anyway. Never mind, publishers or editors or whatever. This was the one he listened to.
And he respected her.
Oh, that's the point. He respected her opinion above all others.
You mentioned your book. You have a new one that was recently published in this country and England.
Yes, I like to talk about it. It's called Steinbeck, A Life in Letters. Robert Walston, our old friend, and I collected letters, and Viking Press has just published it here. And it's letters John wrote to people all over the world, and they cover about 45 years of his life. It's, I think, a fascinating collection of letters.
Now, these are all new, never published before?
Never published before, no. They start when he was a university student at Stanford, and the last letter in the book is a fragment of a letter he wrote to Elizabeth just before he died.
Mrs. Steinbeck, what is your view of the Steinbeck Society?
Oh, I think it's a splendid organization. I think we who are connected with John are most fortunate to have it. It has stimulated more interest in Steinbeck, and I think particularly raised the level of Steinbeck criticism. Elizabeth really knows much more about it than I do, because she and Ted Hayashi were such close friends.
Would you comment on it, please, Ms. Otis?
Well, the important person in this, of course, is Ted Hayashi. It was his idea to start out with. He followed it through from a monthly to a quarterly. He got people to write for it, got professors to write, students to write, and they were only too delighted to have a place where their work and their opinions could be shown. And I don't know of any other author in this country who has had that sort of loving care.
And this is the only society for John Steinbeck?
Yes.
Do you feel that the society has stimulated interest in Steinbeck and his work?
Well, of course, people have always been interested in Steinbeck and his work, but I do think that it has brought it to more people's attention, and particularly to people who read Steinbeck years ago, and it's sort of gone back in their memory. And so many people write and say, well, now that I've read the letters, I'm going back and reread this book and that book. And fortunately, they probably have to buy a book in order to reread it, which helps the royalty statement.
Of course. And I'd like to ask both of you and see if you have a favorite of all his works.
Well, I don't really. It depends. I always like to speak of East of Eden, which I feel has been neglected a good deal, and hope that more people will be studying it, because
one of the reasons I like East of Eden, I like East of Eden. I agree with Elizabeth. I think it's a neglected book, and I think it's John's big book. But it was the first. I have a very personal reason too, because it was the first book he wrote after we were married. So it makes it especially dear to me. But much more than that, I think the book itself is a lot of John's in it, and a lot of the knowledge. He says I put everything in this book that I know.
I'd like to ask you both if you feel if John were alive today, would he be involved in the ecology movement?
Well, I would guess so.
Oh, I
Yes.
think he started
Yes,
it.
definitely.
Well, look at Cannery
Yeah,
Row. He
yeah.
preached for years that they were going to fish out those waters, and they did. They have. The canneries are closed. Everybody's out of a job. They have been for a long time. Don't you agree with me, Elizabeth?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and he's interested in everything, the sea.
Mm. Oh, I still live in the summer in a house out on Long Island by the sea, and in 1955, John felt he had to be by the sea again. We were living in New York, and he went there, and I think that he had to. He had to be by the sea. Don't you feel that? I mean, it was a part of his
yes.
soul.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So he cared about, and he cared about nature anyway.
I think Dr. Hayashi has just entered, and he'd like to greet you to Ball State.
Oh, how nice.
And greetings.
Greetings. Good to see you.
So nice to be here with you and with an old friend and meet a lot of new friends.
So good to see you both.